Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the full review of the Beastbound Assault rival deck, just released for Warhammer Underworlds. Before we get going, I would very much appreciate if you would give this video a like, hit that bell button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. All of that stuff helps me out massively to help with the outreach of the channel. So let's get cracking with the review. And before we start with the searches, as is my kind of go-to routine, I am also going to say that this particular rival deck does not include a plot card, and that is very good news for championship players, especially because when building a championship deck you cannot include cards from two rival decks that both have a plot card. That makes this card lot usable with cards from one of the rival deck that actually has a plot card, and that opens up new avenues for championship players. So championship isn't doing great, but at least it's not dead yet, right? So let's start with the searches here. And we are starting strong here with Dogged Determination. It's a hybrid, scored immediately after an activation step if one or more vulnerable friendly fighters are each on an objective token that is not in your territory. Or two or more friendly fighters are each on an objective token that is not in your territory, and one or more enemy fighters are out of action. So both ways to score it is very doable. But for me, the first option is just way stronger. Just run that 2-wound fighter through a lethal hex, and I mean, you should be able to score that super easy. I will rate this an A. Next we have Loyal Allies. It's a search duel. You score it immediately after an attack action if a friendly fight's attack or defense roll included one or more single supports or double supports, and one or more of those symbols was a success. That's very easy to do, right? You don't actually even need to land a hit. As long as one of those symbols are a success, that's also a very good objective. That's an A as well. Then we have Tireless Explorer. Search duel, scores immediately after friendly fighter makes their second or subsequent move action in the same phase, and after 3 different activation steps. That includes your activations and the opponents. So that could mean, for example, your second activation step. In that phase, that fighter occupied a hex in your territory, no one's territory, and enemy territories. All those territory needs to have been occupied by that fighter. And I think that's just a bit hard. I think that's almost like a 2 glory search for me. And I wouldn't play it. I would rate that a D. Next up we have Unbeatable Team. It's duel, scores immediately after an opponent's power step if there are more friendly fights on objective tokens than enemy fights on objective tokens. Fair enough. Very easy to do with the swarm team. And though there are more enemy fights out of action than friendly fights out of action. Not really liking that part. I think most like 2 and even 3 glory searches are very tempting, obviously, because you could really skewer the glory in your favor, but they will be hard for most times, and they should be hard. 2 glory searches is kind of a relatively new thing, and I don't really fancy anyone, so I'm gonna rate that a D, just because it's the 2 things here doesn't really synergize with each other, because I mean, elite teams are likely to have less fighters out of action than enemy fights out of action, but they are also not likely to have more fights on objective tokens, and vice versa. So it's just doesn't really synergize. So next up we have Unexpected End. You scored immediately after an enemy fighter is taken out of action by a friendly fighter other than a leader. That is a beast, companion, minion, and or has 1 or more denizen upgrades. Okay, so what do I think of this card? I mean, I'm generally not a fan of a fighter being taken out of action by a friendly fighter type cards, because if we can score passive glory, that's just better and less matchup dependent. But this is very easy to fulfill. Say we play a team like Gorlock Black Powers. I mean, in a way it's a bad example because it's a pretty bad team, but they have 1 beast, the monkey's not the beast, 1 beast, 1 companion, and 2 minions. And putting a denizen upgrade on one of them should be easy enough as well, right? And I mean, the same goes for a lot of other teams. I think it's like it's not passive glory, but it's a pretty easy card as far as cards that require you to take someone out of action goes. So I think it's B for me. Then we have We Stand Together. It's a search duel, scores immediately after an opponent's power step if 2 or more friendly fights are each a beast, companion, minion, blah blah blah. Same thing there. This is really easy to fulfill. The second part needs you to be on 2 objectives. So it's a slightly harder hidden purpose, if you remember that card, that's just be on 2 objectives. And I mean, especially when you lean heavily into this deck, it's very, very doable. So it's like a strong B for me here. That wraps up the searches. So feeling pretty confident about this deck, actually. I know I didn't sound very confident when we had the kind of preview, just a couple of cards released, but this is looking much better. Then we have the end phases. First up here is Effortless Teamwork. It's a duel. You score it in an end phase if there are more enemy fights out of action than friendly fights out of action. Fair enough. And each surviving friendly fighter is a beast, companion, minion, and or has 1 or more denizen upgrades. So that's also like Gorlock, right? So the second part is really easy for such a team, but the first part maybe not so much. I think this is more like an elite team card, right? As I said, elite teams are more likely to have less fights out of action than the enemies. And having every friendly fighter, when you only have 3 basically, to be a beast or have a denizen upgrade should be very easy to do. Especially since this card pool doesn't have the plot card, you could combine this with the Tooth and Claw to lean into the beast mechanic as well. So I think this is a pretty strong card, right? It's a B for me. Next up we have Gifted Pathfinder. Scores in end phase if 1 or more friendly fighters are each on an objective token that's not in your territory, and 1 or more of those fighters are within 2 hexes of another friendly fighter. That's a beast, companion, blah blah blah. Very easy to do, and it should be easy for 1 glory. This is reliable enough to play, even if it's just 1 glory. I think the case must be made, though, for not including too many 1 glory end phases. Don't be too, how should we say, comfortable there. You need to take some heavy glory in the end phases if you're going to win games, right? You can't just take 1 glory end phases. But this is reliable enough to include. So what do I rate actually Gifted Pathfinder then? I'm going to rate it a B. I would rate it an A if it were 2 glory, obviously, but it's just 1 glory, so it's never going to be an A. Then we have Inseparable Friends. Score is an end phase if 1 or more surviving friendly beasts, companions, and or minions each have 1 or more denizen upgrades. Or 1 or more surviving friendly fights each have 2 or more denizen upgrades, like A. I mean, basically everyone could score this, right? It's not really hard. But you need to lean heavily into this mechanic. If you play it more in like a championship environment, it's not going to be really played. But in the confines of this rival deck, it's going to be a B for me here. There we have Keen Collector, scores in an end phase if a surviving friendly leader has 3 or more denizen upgrades. I wouldn't play an end phase card that requires the leader to have specific things. Probably pretty much never. Unless you're playing a Voltron kind of team. I mean, if you play someone with 6 wounds and upwards, you could play it, certainly. And there are cards here to include a card here that kind of makes you count, as you have 1 more denizen upgrade than you actually do, and there's card draw for the denizen upgrades and so on and so forth. So if you lean heavily into this deck and you have a really strong leader, it could be a B, otherwise it's not going to be rated at all. Then we have Packmaster, scores in end phase if there are 3 or more friendly fights are in enemy territory, and each of those fights is a beast, companion, minion, and or has 1 or more denizen upgrades. I think it's pretty playable for something like Gits, right? A couple of beasts, and they have enough fighters to spare to actually be able to have 3 fights alive in enemy territory, especially with that scatter. And it's also very doable for something like the Exiled Dead, right? All those moves and everyone being a beast, basically. So for certain teams here, it's going to be an A, but for most other teams, it's going to be like a C. Then we have Train Them Up. Duel scores an end phase if 1 or more friendly fights each have made 1 or more move actions, 1 or more attack actions, and 1 or more other actions in the preceding action. And 1 or more of those fights is a beast, companion, minion, and or has 1 or more denizen upgrades. I don't think this is good enough for 1 glory. It requires too much commitment with the single fighter. It should be 2 glory. If I were to ever play it, so I'm going to rate this a D. Okay, so that wraps up the objectives. Let's move on to the ploys. First up here, we have Blossoming Friendship. Choose a friendly fighter with no tokens. Give that fighter 1 denizen upgrade from your hand. This doesn't cost any glory. Then give the chosen fighter 1 charge token and 1 stagger token. Playing cards without glory is a big deal. Most of the time, if you have a well-built deck, glory won't really be an issue. And the fact that you give a fighter a charge token, I mean, there are certainly teams that could benefit from having charge tokens. I mean, say we have something that inspires of being charged, like Scales, for example. And if you play like a card that everyone needs to have charge token, like move or die or something, this could synergize well with that. But in most cases, this isn't a good card, because you have to play it on a fighter that has no tokens. That means no guard tokens, no stagger tokens, no charge tokens or move tokens. And there you get a charge token for a free upgrade. I think the trade-off is not very good, but it could synergize well with certain warband mechanics. I mean, there are also searches for having everyone on a charge token and stuff. So, I mean, there are clever ways to use it, but generally I don't think it's better than a C. Then we have defensive formation. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters in your territory that are each a beast, companion, minion, and or have 1 or more denizen upgrades. Give each chosen fighter 1 guard token. I don't think guard tokens is all that fantastic. And it's only up to 2, so it's not going to be very strong. I'm going to rate this like a weak C. I mean, guard tokens surely help, but they are just not amazing. Then we have Friendly Swarm. Heal 1 each friendly fighter that is a beast, companion, minion, or has 1 or more denizen upgrades. It's better. I think heal is just more worthwhile than guard, and it could inspire a couple of fights if you play like Iltharis as well. Yeah, but you have to actually have damage to heal 1. It's not up to 1. And I mean, heal is always useful, but it's not game-breaking in any way. It's going to be B. Launch an attack. Choose a friendly fighter with 1 or more upgrades. Break 1 of the chosen fighter's upgrades. Then choose an enemy fighter within 4 hexes of the chosen fighter. Deal 1 damage to the chosen enemy fighter. If you broke a denizen card, stagger the chosen enemy fighter. I think they're just better ping cards, right, than to having to destroy your upgrades. But it's fairly reliable ping damage if you need it, so... it's going to be like a C for me. Then we have Overly Protective. Reaction played is after a successful attack action. The target of the friendly fighter that's a beast, companion, blah blah blah. Draw 2 power cards. That's bloody amazing. Drawing 2 power cards for something that's very easy to accomplish. Very good. It's going to be an A. Then we have Savage the Rise. Choose an enemy fighter within 2 hexes of 1 or more blah blah blah. -1 dice from attack actions made by the chosen fighter. This effect persists until the end of the round or until after the chosen fighter's next attack action. Not very good, right? I mean, -1 dice is fine, especially if it's just one crucial fighter that you have to kind of worry about. But otherwise, the other player would just do something more useful with its activations. And it's just for 1 attack, basically. And I mean, if that chosen fighter has a scything attack, that's just for the first. so I mean, yeah, it's not very good. It's going to be like a weak C. Unexpected ally. Choose a friendly fighter. The chosen fighter is considered to have 1 additional supporting fighter when making range 1 or range 2 attack actions. This effect persists until the chosen fighter makes a successful range 1 or range 2 attack action. I mean, it's okay, but it's not very good. I know there is a search for having like a single support or double support being a success. But I don't really think we need cards to help us with that. It should be easy enough anyway, so we don't really need to invest in that. I mean, there are cards like Crimson Hounds that needs you have to have supporting fighter with 1 of the vampires to make an attack, and I mean, you could find uses for it, obviously, or like Cunning Crew to have the 2 supporting fighters search card being scored, but they should be able to do that anyway. So, but I think it's okay. It's a B. Then we have Vicious Critters. Range 1 attack actions other than scything actions made by beast, blah blah blah. Have Grievous 1. It's okay. If you have a lot of strong range 1 attacks like Morgox or the Vamps, for example, they could use the Grievous. I don't think they have any Grievous in there, so they could use like a little boost. It's okay, it's a B. Well trained, choose a friendly fighter that's a beast, blah blah blah. Push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes. Amazing, it's an A. A 2 hex push that doesn't kind of have any caveats on how you push. Very, very good. Amazing. Then we have Winds of Wrath. While 1 or more fighters that are beast, companions, minions, and blah 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 are out of action, +1 dice to range 1 attack actions other than scything attacks made by those fighters' warband. That's pretty good, and it persists until the end of the round or another domain gambit is played. +1 dice for range 1. Kind of benefits the same warbands I talked about last time, but we need to have someone out of action. It's a B, I think. Alright, upgrades. First up we have Amber Bone Flute, which I talked about in the sneak peek review here. I don't think it's very good, especially not outside of the confines of this rival deck, obviously. You get to react after you activate the fighter. You give the fighter a charge token, and then you reveal cards from the top of your power deck until you reveal a denizen upgrade, and then you add that card to your hand. If you didn't reveal it and it's an upgrade, you place the revealed cards in your power deck and shuffle it back. You have to give them a charge token, so you don't really want to do it unless you've actually charged. And I mean, there's stuff that synergizes with this, obviously. Like having Denizen upgrades on fighters is good. For the synergy of the deck, I just don't think that this is really needed to do it. I think it's like a C for me. Countless familiars, Denizen, when you give this to a fighter, give that fighter and one other friendly fighter within 2 axes or 1 familiar counter. While a fighter has 1 or more familiar counters, that fighter is considered to have 1 additional Denizen upgrades. That's pretty good in the confines of this deck. It's gonna be a B. Outside, it's not gonna be rated. Deadly Swarm, attack action, and Denizen. 1 range, 2 hammers, and has the Swarm trait to its damage characteristic. It also has a snare. The damage characteristic is equal to the number of Denizen upgrades this fighter has. It could be pretty strong, right? But you're not likely gonna have more than 3, so it's not really amazing unless you're playing a team that's like pretty weak. If you have like 5-6 fighters that have like crappy 2 sword, 1 damage attack, then you're gonna benefit. But if you play like more of a 3-4 man elite team, you don't really need this card. It's gonna be like a C for me. Then we have Ever Hungry Fiend, also a Denizen card. You cannot give this to a fighter in your territory. Do not break this card if this fighter is in your territory. So you have to play it outside your territory, but you don't break it if you re-enter your territory. When this fighter makes an attack action that targets an adjacent fighter, so only adjacent, this fighter is considered to have 1 additional supporting fighter. It's okay. It's only for adjacent, so keep that in mind. And obviously have synergy with stuff in this deck. So, I think it's gonna be a C for me here. Then we have Helpful Little Finder, also a Denizen. At the start of the action phase, give this fighter 1 upgrade from your hand. This doesn't cost any glory, then draw 1 power card and break this card. So you have to pay for this upgrade, and then at the start of the action phase you get an upgrade from your hand. But then you break this upgrade, and you get to draw 1 power card. I don't think that's strong enough. I think this is like a C or a D for me. It's a 1 use only to get another upgrade, so just doesn't really. No. Then we have Inspiring Mascot, a Denizen. You cannot give this to a leader or a large fighter. At the end of the action phase, heal 1 this fighter, then push this fighter up to 1x. So you don't have to push, and you get to heal. That's amazing combo, right? I mean, both reactions aren't super good, but together it's really icing on the cake, right? And that push could prove really useful, right? Or very decisive. And the heal is just, as I said, icing on the cake. So that's going to be a strong B for me. Kindred Affinity. At the start of the action phase, draw the top card of your power deck and reveal it. If that card is a Denizen upgrade, give that upgrade to this fighter. This doesn't cost any glory. So it's good that it doesn't cost any glory, but it's not really good that you're shoehorned to give this specific fighter the upgrade. Otherwise, add that card to your hand. It's not too bad, right? It's pretty nice. Extra card draw, kind of shoehorns you into putting upgrades on a specific fighter, but doesn't cost any glory. Yeah, it's pretty good, right? I think it's just like a middle of the road kind of a B. Then we have Stalking Terror, Denizen. When another friendly fighter within 2 axes of this fighter that's a beast, blah blah blah, makes a range 1 or range 2 attack action, this fighter supports that fighter. So a lot of stuff to do with supports. This is gonna be a B as well. It's to have support from 2 range is pretty good. Then we have Denizen. Enemy fighters within 1 hex of this fighter can't hold objectives. That's really annoying. So I think this is pretty interesting. I think it's a B for me, and you can really mess the glory of opponents up with this one. And you could also like score cards that you score if you hold more than the other. I mean, yeah, it could. I can see a lot of good use for this card. Just don't play too early, is my advice. It's going to be very telegraphed, so play it like a surprise at the end of your activations, and then just move on up and be annoying as fudge. Then, yeah, it's going to be B. We have a Vicious Familiar. It's a Denizen, obviously. It's a reaction if used is during an adjacent enemy fighter's attack action after the attack roll. If the attack roll contains 2 or more attack dice, the attacking player must pick 1 attack dice from the attack roll. Ignore the result of that dice. So, -1 dice would obviously be a lot better, because this lets the opponent decide what attack to remove, right? Which could actually help opponents score cards like Unequal Contest or other cards that requires you to only have successes. And I mean, you could actually unintentionally help your opponent with this card. But I mean, generally speaking, it's going to be bad for them. If they have like 2 hammers and you have 1 shield for defense, then you could have a tie, which otherwise would require you to roll a crit or whatnot. But it's not very strong. I think it's like a C for me. It's just not amazing. And it's only for adjacent. So that's it. I think, I mean, generally speaking, a lot of cards are hard to combine with other cards in a championship environment because it kind of requires you to lean heavily into this mechanic. But as a Nemesis deck, I think it's not as strong as the Fearsome Fortress, but I think it comes up second in my opinion here. The Tooth and Claw kind of requires you to kill too many things. And the Daring Delvers, just something with that one that seems off. It should work better than it does. And the other rival decks are just not good. The Illusory Might and the Deadly Depths are just not very good, right? So, yeah. I'm actually fairly positive here. So I'm intrigued to try this one out, and we are going to try it out in our next battle report. It's very sad to say also that we did film a battle report last weekend, but it ended up with a really, really shaky camera, so I didn't put it up because I just felt that the quality was too low. I will admittedly say that I lost the game with Gorlock versus the Hexbanes, which wasn't a surprise. My searches worked really well, but I couldn't hit anything. So I didn't really get to try out the new mechanic with light finger reaction being a lot easier and inspiring fights being a lot easier. And gaining swag getting a lot easier because I couldn't land a damn hit. But anyway, if you enjoyed this review, make sure to like the video, hit that bell button, leave a comment, that's very important to help us out with the algorithm, and subscribe, of course, it's dearly appreciated. Without further ado, take care, bye.